if somebody asked you the question, what is it like to follow Jesus? What would you say? We're going to try and think about that question today. We're carrying on our series in Matthew. And I didn't get to listen to the sermon last week because I was out in the youth. But hopefully, Andy said something along the lines of Jesus sending out his disciples. Hopefully that happened. Did that happen?
I did the Colossians passage.
You did the Colossians passage? Oh, okay. Yes, okay. I was there for that one. Okay. So, that's embarrassing, isn't it? I'm going to tell you a more embarrassing story in a minute, so let's not worry. So, we are now picking it up from there in Matthew chapter 10, from verse 16 until the end. And this now is Jesus has been telling his disciples he's going to send them out. And now what we're going to see is he's going to tell them what to expect. Okay? So he's going to tell them what following Jesus will be like. And he's doing that so that they'll know. But also remember, they're off to tell people about Jesus. So he's also doing it so that they can accurately tell the people they're speaking to. When I was 21, I used to do quite a lot of train travel. And one day, I was getting a train from Oxford to Bath. And like I said, I used to do a lot of train travel, so I was very used to going on the trains, and actually it was a line that I knew very well. So I really cannot explain or give an excuse for why what I'm about to tell you happened. I don't know if I was feeling groggy or something, but I got to the train station, and I went to the wrong platform, and I got on the wrong train. I still to this day don't quite know how I managed to do that. And anyway, I sat on the train and I had my ticket to Bath. And I wasn't really paying much attention, but we stopped at a station and I thought, that doesn't sound very familiar. Now, it wasn't a big station. It wasn't like Reading where I'd been like, oh, hang on. It was a small station and I thought, that doesn't sound very familiar. And then we got to another stop and I was like, that definitely doesn't sound familiar. And then I started looking at the sort of scrolling thing that tells you the stops. I don't know if they still have them now, because this was over 20 years ago. And anyway, just as I was doing that, the ticket inspector came along, and I got my ticket, and I said, I think I might be on the wrong train. And so he said, yeah, you are on the wrong train. You're going in the opposite direction. We're about to stop at Lymington Spa, and what you need to do is get off and then go back the other way. And so it was a bit embarrassing, and I got off. And this was when most people had mobile phones, but not smartphones. They were sort of the brick phones, but I had resisted the idea of getting a mobile phone. So I found out when my train was leaving to go back to the right destination. And then I had to go and find a phone booth and phone the person I was meeting and say, for reasons best explained when I get there, I'm going to be a couple of hours late now. So I did eventually get there, but I was on the wrong train, going the wrong destination for quite a while, and I had to get off and go back the other way. Please don't do this, but if you were to follow me home after this meeting, do you know what you'd have to do? You'd have to go on the same roads as me, okay? And if you were close enough, if you were following me in my car, you'd hear me being fired a range of questions, varying from, is the devil in chains for 1,000 years, to what are all the names of the gladiators? And me saying, I don't know, to all of them. You'd have to go to my house. If you were going to follow me, you would have to go to all the places I go to and go through all the experiences I go through. And Jesus is about to explain to his disciples the exact same thing. That if we're going to follow Jesus, we will have to go to all the places and go through all the things that Jesus went through. I'm going to use this, can we go back to the train slide, Andrew, if that's all right? Slide number 3. I'm going to use this train analogy this morning. So I'm going to compare following Jesus, I'm going to describe it as being on the following Jesus train? Can everyone cope with me doing that? Is that all right? Okay, brilliant. So, where does the following Jesus train go? Let's have a look. Okay, I've done a nice little tube map here. So let me just pick some verses to read to you. So let's start from verse 16. So it goes to danger. I'm sending you out like sheep among wolves. Verse 17. It goes to beatings. Be on your guard. You will be handed over to the local councils and be flogged in the synagogues. It goes to arrest. Verse 19. But when they arrest you. It goes to hatred. Verse 22. You will be hated by everyone because of me. It goes to persecution. Verse 23. When you are persecuted in one place, flee to another. It goes to accusations. Verse 25. Now just notice in this section you'll see that Jesus has been mostly saying you and your to his disciples up until this point. And so we might be able to say, oh, okay, he was just saying those things to his 12 disciples. But actually from this point on, he uses very general language. He doesn't really use you, again, much at all from this point on. So, accusations, verse 25. If the head of the house has been called Beelzebul, that's the devil, how much more the members of his household? So that's anyone following Jesus. Verse 28, it goes to death. Do not be afraid of those who kill the body. And then verse 38, it goes to suffering. Whoever does not take up their cross and follow me is not worthy of me. And probably a lot of you will know, but back then it was a Roman-occupied world, and taking up your cross meant you were off to be crucified. Now, if you were to go back through those things, you'll notice that actually every one of those happened to Jesus, didn't they? And Jesus is telling us that if we're going to follow him, we're going to go to all the places and all the experiences that Jesus himself went through. So what do you think? How's this train sounding to you so far? The following Jesus train sounding like a barrel of laughs? Sounding like a nice, comfortable journey? Okay, I haven't finished yet either. So I'm going to carry on, and I'm just going to tell us, by going into a little bit more detail, or reading some of those verses again, to really emphasize some of the places that train does not stop. So here's the first place that the following Jesus train does not stop. It does not stop at ease and safety. Let's read these verses, 16 to 20. I am sending you out like sheep among wolves. Therefore be as shrewd as snakes and as innocent as doves. Be on your guard. You will be handed over to the local councils and be flogged in the synagogues. On my account, you will be brought before governors and kings and as witnesses to them and to the Gentiles. But when they arrest you, do not worry about what to say or how to say it. That doesn't sound very comfortable, does it? It's not a very comfortable or easy or safe sounding experience, is it? Okay, let's have a look at the next one. So it also doesn't stop at peace with people. I don't know how you feel about that one. I find the first one tough because I quite like a comfortable life. I also find this one tough as well because I don't really like not being at peace with people. But let's look at some more verses around this. So picking it up then in verse 21, brother will betray brother to death, and a father his child. Children will rebel against their parents and have them put to death. You will be hated by everyone because of me. But the one who stands firm to the end will be saved. When you are persecuted in one place, flee to another. Okay, and then also verses 34 to 36. So Jesus starts talking almost poetically here. Do not suppose that I have come to bring peace to the earth. I did not come to bring peace, but a sword. I should just sort of give it an aside. So when Jesus says he was coming to bring a sword, I tend to immediately think that he means he came to bring war, but actually, typically in biblical language, that tends to mean division, and really fits into this context. So he's saying there that he brought to bring division. For I have come to turn a man against his father, a daughter against her mother, a daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law. I always feel that last one seems like it needs the least work on Jesus' behalf, but maybe not applying that to my own family, just to be clear. But the stereotype, that one seems like it needs the least work. A man's enemies will be the members of his own household. Now, I'm going to do something that I really don't like doing at this point. Okay? I'm going to do something that no preacher should do, and I'm going to ask you for a couple of minutes to hold all the logic in your head. So everything I've been saying to you, press pause for a minute while I do a total aside. Okay? And I don't really like doing that because it doesn't work very well. It makes people feel a bit lost or confused. But there's a verse in here that I think I can't just not explain. Okay, so if I read verse 23 to you, it says this: when you are persecuted in one place, flee to another. Truly I tell you, you will not finish going through the towns of Israel before the Son of Man comes. So if you've been in churches for a while, you may well know that as Christians, we believe that Jesus has died, risen from the dead, and gone to be with the Father in heaven, but that one day he will return back to earth. And there's a lot of different ways that Christians think that could be worked out, but generally speaking, they all agree that that is going to happen, that Jesus is going to return. Now, when we read this verse, we might feel like there's a bit of a problem here, because Jesus says, truly I say to you, you will not finish going through the towns of Israel before the Son of Man comes. Now, I think that we can fairly safely conclude that the disciples did, in the last 2,000 years, finish going through the towns of Jerusalem, or through the towns of Israel. But Jesus hasn't yet returned. And so can you see the problem that we're left with by this verse, that we think to ourselves, well, what happened here? Did Jesus get it wrong? Did we misunderstand it? And I haven't got time to go into a lot of detail here, but I just want to put my understanding of this verse across. There's a few different understandings, but this is mine. The first thing is that Jesus is using language found in the Old Testament, found in Daniel chapter 7, when Daniel has a vision of the Son of Man. And he has a vision of the Son of Man coming. But where's he going to? We tend to read that and think this is the Son of Man coming back here. But actually in Daniel 7, the Son of Man is going to the Father in heaven. He's not going down to earth. He's going to the Father in heaven, and it's in the context of judgment. And so one interpretation of this is that when the temple was destroyed in about AD 70, probably before they had finished going through all the towns of Israel, that actually the Son of Man came to God the Father and said that a time of judgment needed to happen on the nation of Israel for rejecting Jesus, that the temple would be destroyed. And so I do think that that is a part of this interpretation. I also think it's doing something called prophetic perspective, which, sorry for the theological term, but happens a lot in the Bible. When we think of a prophecy, if the weatherman stands up and says it's going to rain on Tuesday, when Tuesday comes, you know it's either happened or it's not happened, right? But with prophecies in the Bible, often they have this, what they call prophetic perspective, where you get to a certain date and something gets fulfilled, but then it gets fulfilled in a sort of different way later on. And I think that's going on here too, that there's that fulfillment when the temple was destroyed, but then also there's this kind of generalizing that going to all the towns in Israel is actually not just going to the towns in Israel, but it's actually bringing the gospel to the whole world. And that will still be going on until the point that Jesus returns. So hopefully if you found that a bit of a confusing verse, that aside has been helpful. And now magically switch back to the logic that I was going through. Can we all do that? Aside is done. We'll come back to the main thing. So far we've talked about the stops on the following Jesus train. And we've looked at two places where it doesn't stop And I'm going to look at one more as well, which is this: it's being respected. The Jesus train doesn't necessarily stop there either. Let's have a look at verses 24 and 25. The student is not above the teacher, nor a servant above his master. Is it enough for students to be like their teachers, and servants like their masters? If the head of the house has been called Beelzebul, how much more the members of his household? And that doesn't sound like a place where we're being respected. And I don't know about you, but actually, again, for me, feeling respected is something that I like. It's not something I like, the idea of being thought of as a cheat or as being like the devil. I don't really like the idea of people thinking that of me. And yet, that's part of the following Jesus train. That's one of the stops. So, look, at this point, you might think, okay, I think I've probably heard enough. And you might ask a very sensible follow-up question. You might say, why on earth, if the following Jesus train goes to all those awful-sounding places and not really through any of the ones that I really like, then why on earth would anybody in their right mind want to follow Jesus? And that is a very sensible question, given what Jesus has just been telling his disciples. And I want to put to you that there are 2 reasons, and only 2 reasons, why you should follow Jesus. And this is the first one. If I've been describing one train as the following Jesus train, I want to describe the other one as the not following Jesus train. Okay? Are you okay with that? So the first reason to get on the following Jesus train is where the other train goes. That's the first reason. Let's just read these verses. So this is now verse 26 to 28. Do not be afraid of them, for there is nothing concealed that will not be disclosed, or hidden that will not be made known. What I tell you in the dark, speak in the daylight. What is whispered in your ear, proclaim from the roofs. Now, again, this is a bit where Jesus has he's slipped into a kind of poetic language here. But actually what this is referring to is that, again, there's something that Christians believe, that one day each of us will stand before God and we'll have to tell God how we've lived our life. We'll have to give an account for everything that we've done, every good decision we've made, every bad decision we've made. And this language of nothing being hidden is always used in that context, because it's saying that on that day when we stand in front of God and have to explain how we've lived, there will be nothing that we could hide from God. There won't be a single good or bad motive that we can pretend didn't happen, because God sees everything, and he sees everything in our heart. And so in the context of that day, he carries on and he says, do not be afraid of those who kill the body but cannot kill the soul. Rather, be afraid of the one who can destroy both soul and body in hell. Now, I don't really know that much about hell. I couldn't tell you everything theological about it. But one thing I do know is that there is no worse place than hell. I know that all of those stops that I've talked about on the following Jesus train, the being hated, the being persecuted, even the being killed, that none of those compare to the awfulness of hell. And if you are on the not following Jesus train, that is where it is going. I'm not saying that to try and scare anybody, but that is exactly what Jesus is saying right there. Now, that we will come back to that. But that first reason then to follow Jesus, the first reason to get on the following Jesus train, is because of where the other train is going. But actually, that's not really a reason to follow Jesus. It's a reason to get off the other train. So that's not a positive reason to follow Jesus. It's a reason to stop not following Jesus. Bit of a double negative there. So our next reason, though, is this. It's to be with Jesus. Now, remember the context that I thought Andy had given you, but it turns out Matt had given you and I'd forgotten. That Jesus at this point, he's with his disciples. Okay, he's with his 12 best friends. And he hasn't just said, he hasn't gone on to Indeed and put on a job advert for some people to send out preaching. He has chosen 12 people to be with him, to become best friends with, to let them see what an amazing teacher he is, to let them see the amazing miracles he does, to let them see what an incredible heart he has, to let them get to the point where they understand that there is nothing better in the world than Jesus. And so when he's explaining to them that they're going to need to go through all these things, he's going to be telling them, we're going to see in a minute, that he will be with them in every single one of them. And that the reason to go through those things, is because the other option is not being with him. And what the disciples are, the point that they're at, is where they would go through anything in order to be with Jesus, because they understand that he is better than anything else they can find in the world. And that's the second reason to follow Jesus. That's the reason to get on the following Jesus train. Where the other train goes is the reason to get off that one. But because you've recognized that Jesus is the best thing in the world, better than anything else, is the only reason to get on the following Jesus train. And let's just have a look at a couple of those verses there, because I went through them and I highlighted the sort of negative to all the stops, but actually all of them comes with a positive as well. So if we go to verse 32 and 33, so this says, whoever acknowledges me before others, so whoever says, I'm with Jesus, he's the best, I will also acknowledge before my Father in heaven. But whoever disowns me before others, so whoever thinks, actually, I don't think Jesus is that great, I will disown before my Father in heaven. So following Jesus means you get to be with him, with his Father in heaven forever. And this is talking about the end of our lives. And then if we also look at verses 37 to 39, anyone who loves their father or mother more than me is not worthy of me. Anyone who loves their son or daughter more than me is not worthy of me. Whoever does not take up their cross and follow me is not worthy of me. So following Jesus is about saying there is nothing else better in life than being with Jesus. But I want to encourage you with 2B, okay? Following Jesus and being with Jesus is not just about being with Jesus in eternity. It's about being with Jesus now. And if we go back through some of these verses, if we go to our first passage, look, the bit where they get handed over for beatings and arrested finishes by saying, verse 20, for it will not be you speaking, but the Spirit of your Father speaking through you. And then if you go to verse 23, it's talking about the Son of Man coming to be with them. If you go to verse 25, notice this one is a little subtle, but if the head of the house has been called Beelzebub, how much more the members of his household? Members of his household. Being with Jesus. You're not a member of his household if you're not being with Jesus. And again then, picking up in verse 29, so I mentioned earlier that Jesus kind of makes this shift from using the word you to speaking directly to his disciples, to a more general language. There's actually one spot where he shifts back. And this is here. Are not two sparrows sold for a penny? Yet not one of them will fall to the ground outside your Father's care. And even the very hands of your head are all numbered. So don't be afraid, you are worth more than many sparrows. Jesus is trying to make this very personal, that actually, if you're a follower of Jesus, you are worth so much to him. Being with Jesus is not just for eternity, but it's for now. And there is nothing that we shouldn't be willing to go through to be with Jesus, if we really understand how amazing he is. What I want to do now is I want to bring in some application. So we've looked through the verses, we've tried to understand what Jesus was telling them, and we've seen that he's telling his disciples what to expect when they follow him. Not just so that they know, but so that the people they tell can properly understand. This sermon has been one of the easiest to prepare that I've ever given in terms of what to say. But it's been the most challenging in terms of application that I've probably ever given as well. And so I'm going to ask you some questions, and I think they're quite hard-hitting questions to consider for yourselves, but I don't want to pretend that I haven't found it incredibly challenging to ask those questions to myself too. So look, here's the first question. This is for people who've decided already to follow Jesus. And the question I want to ask you is, why are you following Jesus? Because I think, as I've said, that there's only two reasons to follow Jesus. There's where the other train goes, and there's to be with Jesus. But I think sometimes we think that following Jesus is about community, or about being respected, or sometimes even about self-righteousness, or about all sorts of other things that we might like. And actually sometimes those do happen when you're following Jesus and involved in church, but they're not promised to us. And actually, if that's the reason that you're following Jesus, I want to suggest to you that you're actually not following Jesus. And I want you to read through what Jesus has been saying here and decide, is this actually what I want? Do I think Jesus is amazing enough that I'm willing to go through all of those horrible sounding things so that I can be with him? And if that's a no, then I think you're better off knowing you're not really on the train you think you are. And I'm trying to be that ticket inspector here and telling you, actually, if that's what you're looking for, if it's not to follow Jesus because he's the best thing in the world, then you're actually on the wrong train. And then my next question is to anybody who is not following Jesus at the moment. I didn't comment on those very final verses where, again, you see Jesus going into a kind of poetic mode, and he says about people who welcome you to the disciples, people who welcome a prophet, people who welcome a righteous person, and they'll get the same reward. And I think really what this is saying is that if someone is willing to talk to you about Jesus, then you have the chance to get exactly the same reward that they do. If you will listen to them, entertain what they're saying, and decide to get off the not following Jesus train and get on the right train, the following Jesus train, then you too can have that exact same reward that they have of being with Jesus and having one day eternity with Jesus and none of these dangers anymore. And then my last question I want to ask you is, because we've been thinking a lot at church about telling other people about Jesus. And I want to come back right to the start when I asked you that question, that if somebody said to you, what is it like to follow Jesus? What would you say to them? And would you say, it's great, we come along, we have nice tea and coffee, we sing some lovely songs, some predominantly tall guys, occasionally bald guys, stand up and tell us some fun stuff. You'll love it. Or would you actually, maybe not immediately, but would you be intentional that the conversation needs to be actually the only reasons to follow Jesus are because the other one leads to hell, and because Jesus is the best thing you will find in this world?